If you need legal help, then you need Bordas and Bordas, because our goal is to deliver the maximum result for every case we handle. Success speaks for itself. Bordas and Bordas. Our passion is to protect people.
Hello, I'm Jamie Bordas. Welcome to another edition of the Bordas and Bordas Legal Review. Each week we talk about local, statewide, and national issues affecting the people here in the Ohio Valley. With me again this week is Chris, don't call me Nellie Regan, my law partner and former national debate champion. The last several weeks we've been talking about the presidential debates, and we talked about the election that would be coming up. Now we're going to break down the election, talk about the results a little bit, and we may even end the show with a little bit of football talk today. Chris, thanks for being here again.
Well, it's important for hip-hop to have a role in everything that we do, Jamie.
It is. So I'm glad that that you take on that role so well here at West Liberty. Chris, I want to start off talking about some of the local races. When I say local, I'm talking statewide, and particularly with the judiciary. Supreme Court race. Justice Robin Davis, reelected by a particularly significant margin. She was out in front, and I think that's kind of what we expected. She is a sitting Supreme Court justice, has a lot of support on both sides of the aisle, labor, the chamber, lawyers on both sides of the fence, so not much of a surprise that she was reelected.
No, I think that was a theme of the night. I mean, there were some surprises, but there were also some situations that were not as surprising. And Robin Davis was certainly a known quantity in West Virginia politics, had been elected before, had a track record as a justice that established her, ran a very positive campaign focusing on her issues, and I think it was not a surprise at all to see her reelected with strong margins. But on the other hand, the rest of the Supreme Court candidates were not as well known. They weren't people that had a track record in West Virginia politics, and I think that led to more surprising results there. Honestly, I think no one could have been sure exactly which candidate would come out of that three-horse race for the second seat on our Supreme Court, and eventually it was Alan Lawfrey.
Alan Lawfrey is a clerk on the court, clerked for Justice Maynard before Justice Maynard went off the court, and then when Justice Workman went onto the court, she kept Alan Lawfrey on as her clerk. And, it takes a lot of, I think, gumption to run for the court as a clerk. You don't know how people are going to receive that. Maybe not as well known as some of the other candidates. And yet, through a good campaign, taking advantage of the public financing option and some really, really good ads that touched the hearts of people, he was able to come out with a victory.
Yeah, he sure was. And I think, I don't know if all of our viewers are familiar with the role of the court clerk. He was a law clerk on the court, meaning that he would research legal issues, help prepare memoranda for the justices regarding the issues that were about to come up before the court. And he's also a published author, and so he would be a very qualified person to take on this role. But I think we have to emphasize it's not very common for someone to go directly from the position of law clerk to the position of state Supreme Court justice. So it's an exciting story. It is something like the equipment manager of a football team being promoted right into the head coach spot, and that's kind of exciting.
It is exciting. And I tell you what, I liked when Supreme Court justices are people with courage, and I think it takes courage, first of all, to do things, to reach out and write books, to run for Supreme Court justice when you've really had no political background. So I think it's really fascinating. I'm excited to see how he does on the court. We go down there frequently. You and I have both been down there arguing cases in front of the court. Justice Davis, always very, very well prepared, knows the cases. In fact, as you and I know, when you go down there and you're arguing cases in front of Justice Davis, you better know not just how the law in your state, but you better know how other states have handled those issues, because she'll look and say, what are the other states doing with this issue if West Virginia hasn't looked at it before? And she knows, so you better know too.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, Justice Davis is a scholar of the law, wrote a very famous and extraordinarily useful treatise on West Virginia procedure with former Justice Cleckley, and scholarship has really defined her tenure on the law. Her opinions tend to be extremely detailed, as you say, taking into account what other states are doing in their law and trying to develop West Virginia law into the best state that it can possibly be. And that's certainly an outstanding aspect of her work. And we have now a new justice to see where he will fit into the mix with, of course, Justice Benjamin, Justice Workman, and Justice Ketchum.
Speaking of Justice Cleckley, former Supreme Court Justice, professor at the WVU College of Law, recently announced he'd be retiring at the end of this academic year, and certainly I want to take this opportunity, since his name came up, to wish him well in retirement. I remember when my mom was in law school down at WVU, and he was one of the, even back then, one of the well-known, kind of most famous professors, and certainly we want to wish him well in his retirement that will soon be upon us.
Well deserved.
Sticking with the legal end of things, the Attorney General's race, I said last week heading into the election that I would not at all be surprised if Darrell McGraw would be defeated. The Republican Party has been aiming for him for a number of years. He had close margins of victory in 2008, 2004. This time, a much more well-funded Patrick Morrisey, the Republican challenger, was able to defeat him and become West Virginia's new Attorney General. Not particularly surprised to me, but a surprise to a lot of people around the state because Darrell McGraw had been in that spot for so long.
Well, that's right. And I think this is one of those situations where we have to be careful that we don't prejudge the new Attorney General simply based on the fact that he became a part of what was a very long campaign to unseat Darrell McGraw, basically based on Darrell McGraw doing his job and aggressively prosecuting companies that violate the law. And so, that's what happened to Darrell McGraw's campaign. But now we have a new Attorney General, and it's often the case, and this seems to happen to Republicans more than Democrats for some reason, but it's often the case that you don't get quite the candidate that you thought when you put someone in there for the specific purpose of defeating a Democratic candidate. So we'll see if the new Attorney General is willing to take on wrongdoers in our state the same way that Darrell McGraw was or not.
Well, one of the things that was interesting, Chris, was the governor's race. Two men who had just faced off last year for the vacant governor's position, Earl Ray Tomlin and Bill Maloney. And, of course, Governor Tomlin, I think, had a decided advantage coming into this election in that he was the sitting governor. And, people had just done this last year. We'd already been through this election, and it kind of seems like, okay, this was already decided once. Most people thought that he should be our governor. He's doing well. He's been in politics a long time. And the challenger, Maloney, a relative political newcomer, and the governor was able to win by a fairly comfortable margin. It wasn't that close, really.
No, I think, let's face it, Earl Ray Tomlin had just been elected the governor of our state, within the past year or 18 months or so, and I think the people were prepared to stick with him and let him do the job. Now, it's very interesting that he is term limited. His short term before this election, after the special election, counts as one of his terms, and so he cannot return as governor after this. So it's going to be interesting as we go into our next election cycle of seeing who will seek out the next chance to be the governor of the state of West Virginia. Now, some of the candidates come right to mind. Rick Thompson ran second to Governor Tomlin in the primary. Natalie Tennant was also involved, if I'm not mistaken, and Jeff Kessler from the Northern Panhandle here also ran a campaign. So those are certainly three candidates, but there may be others. I don't know who you think might be coming in there, Jamie.
Well, I think there's a couple things. Number one, and I'm going to say this now, don't be surprised if there end up being challenges down the road to whether or not that first one-year term of Governor Tomlin counted as a term. I think we could certainly see that. I think we could see some type of challenge to that. We could even see something on the ballots regarding that. So the next time around the midterm elections. So don't be surprised if that may happen down the road. However, if it doesn't, I think you could see some other people that have been in the political ring for a long time throw their hats into the governor's race. Perhaps Justice Davis, who we were talking about earlier. Certainly, she could make a bid to be the first female governor in the history of the state. She's been in politics, well received, led the ticket here for the Supreme Court race. She would certainly be a good candidate. You could see on the Republican side, Congresswoman Shelley Moore Capito taking a run. Of course, her father, Arch Moore, was governor of West Virginia. Again, perhaps she'd like to be the first governor of West Virginia. It would depend on whether she wants to leave Washington and whether
first female governor.
Excuse me, first female governor. Thank you. It depends on whether she want to leave Washington. It's once you're in Washington, it's tough to want to leave there. So that would be certainly a factor in her decision. So it'll be interesting to see, how that governor's race shakes out 4 years from now. And I think there'll be a number of people putting feelers out there early and seeing maybe if they got a shot at winning the thing.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the term limits, Jamie. The mayor, of New York City, Mayor Bloomberg there was term limited for quite some time, and then he just went and got the law changed so he could get himself a third term. So it's certainly not unprecedented that a successful politician who's in an important seat manages to create a situation where apparent term limits seem to disappear. So maybe that is something to watch for in a couple of years.
It may be. You know, Chris, we're going to talk a little bit here about the presidential race, and I just want to talk about that briefly before we head into our break. Right now, as it stands, President Barack Obama, 4 more years in the White House, and not really by a close margin. And we've still got Florida out there, but it looks like Florida's going to go his way also, making the margin even greater.
Well, no, it is. There's no question that it was a commanding electoral majority for President Obama once again. And I think what that really conveys is that the Republican Party in this country is facing what is known as the wilderness here. They are 2-time losers in presidential elections, and they have lost this election in particularly bad economic times. And that's going to lead them to have to question their entire strategy because that's what you have to do when you face 2 stinging defeats in a row, as they have.
You know, the Electoral College vote is at 303 for President Obama, 206 for Governor Romney, and again, Florida's still out there. So this was not even as close as people thought. And as we were, here on WLUTV 14 on election night, bringing the results in and analyzing them, and we started seeing the various states, the Colorados, Wisconsin, Virginia, all heading the president. I mean, as soon as we saw that, we knew it was a done deal. So, it'll be interesting to see in the next 4 years whether the president is able to push through certain agendas that he wants to push through. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we come back from the break. But we do need to take a break here. Stay with us. We'll be with you shortly. Welcome back to the Bordas and Bordas Legal Review. We're talking about the post-election topics, so to speak, and the results and analyzing them and breaking them down. And one of the things, Chris, we were talking about before the break was the presidential election, and that President Obama was not only able to win, but win a significant victory in the Electoral College, up by nearly 100 votes with Florida still to come. Perhaps it looks like that's leaning the president's way. But the bigger question is why? Why did the Republicans not do better than perhaps they thought they were going to do?
Well, I think it really speaks to some serious changes that have occurred in our country, Jamie, over the last, let's say 30 to 32 years. I mean, since the Reagan-Carter elections. I mean, the Republican presidential strategy has not really changed a whole lot over that time. It has been strong on defense and what Republicans call family values, which has typically meant anti-abortion, anti-gay rights, war on drugs, and then free market, free trade, low taxes. And of those major planks that have been a part of every Republican candidate's pitch to the electorate, only the last one seems to have any currency with the electorate that we have right now. I mean, in a war-weary country, nobody is really excited to hear about more war. The ballot initiatives regarding legalizing marijuana are beginning to pass. The nation's weary of the drug war as well. Ballot initiatives on gay marriage, which used to be there as bait to create more Republican turnout, are now winning. And the country simply doesn't seem to be where it was 25 and 30 years ago. And so those key points that are big in Republican primary circles don't command a sufficient amount of votes nationwide to win in the Electoral College. And so the last element, free trade, free market, low taxes, is really what Governor Romney kind of tried to sell for the very last portion of his campaign, trying to get away from those social issues and trying to get away from foreign policy. Remember when we talked about the foreign policy debate, how he was simply agreeing with President Obama on so many different things. So that's what's happened here, Jamie. The major planks of Republican presidential politics are now minority positions across the country. And while they may win you Arkansas, they may win you SEC country, they don't win in Virginia. They don't win in North Carolina. They don't win in Colorado and New Mexico and Nevada. They don't win anywhere in the Rust Belt, in Michigan, in Ohio now. And the Republicans simply can't win without those states. So it's time for that party to potentially revamp what they stand for or face permanent minority status.
One of the things that I thought was interesting was that a number of people coming into this election thought that President Obama's supporters from 2008 maybe weren't as energetic for him, weren't as vocal, maybe some of them had jumped off ship. I don't know that was necessarily the case. I think that it's just when you're already in the office that people aren't going to be as energized and vocal about bringing you down about bringing you up because you're already there. But I think that the results kind of show that the people that supported the president in 2008 generally came out and supported him again in 2012, and it's just that the people that were not for President Obama were the more vocal and loud ones perhaps this time, but it didn't necessarily change votes.
No, certainly not enough votes. I mean, there were fewer votes cast this time around, and the president will have a smaller majority. In this case, he will defeat Governor Romney by a lesser margin than he was able to defeat, certainly in the popular vote, John McCain. And so what we're looking at there, I think, is you're exactly right. It's a little bit of boredom. Obviously, President Obama can't be as new and exciting, as he was 4 years ago. That's just not possible. But nevertheless, I mean, the Electoral College defeat that the Republicans are going to take here is going to be over 100 electoral votes. I mean, it's not close.
Right.
And in that scenario, that party's got some serious rethinking to do, or we could be facing, a more permanent style of Democratic presidents one after another after another.
Well, the question is, where do they go from here? I mean, you've still got a Republican-controlled House of Representatives. Of course, the Democrats control the U.S. Senate. But what do they do? One, to try to push forward some of their agenda, but yet at the same time, how do things get done in this country when you've got a split among the parties in Congress and you've got a Democratic president? What do the Republicans do?
Our colleague at Bordas and Bordas, Jeff Brown, reminded me yesterday, Jamie, that Mitch McConnell, the Senate minority leader, senator from Kentucky, declared at the outset of the Obama presidency that it would be the #1 goal of congressional Republicans to make sure that he was a one-term president. I mean, think about that. What an extraordinary commitment to gridlock, to battling the other party for electoral purposes as opposed to trying to get anything done for the country. And now, 4 years later, what do the Republicans have to show for it? Obamacare, a Democratic priority for decades, has passed. And they've lost the presidency back-to-back. So that, again, I think has to be part of the rethinking of whether or not our leaders in Washington are going to go to work for us or whether they're going to continue to work on the next election, even when it's 4 years out. And I don't think that strategy of opposition can persist for another 4 years. I mean, it would take incredible pig-headedness, frankly, for the Republicans to try that after getting their hats handed to them once again.
Well, Chris, now that the election's over, people can turn their attention to football. I don't know that it's not been there in the first place, but there has been a lot of, of course, attention on the elections. But it's football season, and it's the tail end of football season, and that certainly means typically controversy. We're in the last couple years here of the BCS system in college. 4 teams still undefeated: Alabama, Oregon, Kansas State, Notre Dame, all undefeated. You and I were in South Bend last weekend for that triple overtime thriller between Notre Dame and Pitt. And it was interesting because, one of the things I've heard people consistently say is that no matter what you feel about Notre Dame, that Notre Dame doing well is good for college football because it gets people talking, and people either love Notre Dame or they hate them. Everybody seems to have an opinion. Of course, being Notre Dame grads ourselves, we're in the love them category, and we had to suffer through that 3 overtimes, and I thought that you and Jeff were going to have to carry me out of the stadium by the time the game was over because my heart was pounding. But, it'll be interesting to see down the stretch here what happens. I mean, Alabama, kind of presumed to be in the game if they run the table. I mean, I don't think anybody is disputing the fact that Alabama's in. But now Oregon is kind of starting to get the talk of they're the second best team. They run the table, they're in, but they still have to see Stanford. They still have to see Oregon State. They still have to see perhaps USC or UCLA in the Pac-12 championship game.
Well, look. I mean, we've seen this before, and we see it every year in college football. You got these gimmicky teams with system quarterbacks. We've seen quarterbacks from the Big 12, throwing for 50 touchdowns in a year and 6,000 yards. But those teams don't play any defense, and that's not real football, and it's not serious. And then those quarterbacks go on to the NFL where they're exposed. And now we have this Oregon team, that scores 70 points a game, and they give up 60 points a game, and that's not real football either. I mean, I think most Americans know that the football that they play at the University of Notre Dame and that they play, as you say, at Alabama. That's what football looks like. 24-14, 17-14, teams that hit and play hard and don't just play basketball on grass running up and down the field all day. So I think America is determined to see Alabama and Notre Dame in the national championship game, and that there's going to be serious problems in this country if that isn't allowed to happen.
Well, you know, the computers have a say in this now. I mean, you've got two different elements of this BCS formula. You've got the human element, the polls. You've got which is the ESPN USA Today coaches poll. And then you also have the Harris Interactive poll, whatever the heck that means. I mean, there's various people from different fields of sport, media, et cetera, that vote in that Harris Interactive poll. But then also you have the different computers that weigh in on this. You know, 6 computers, the top and the bottom one for each team get thrown out, and they take the remaining 4 and average them. But both elements, and, you know, strength of schedule certainly plays a component there. But looking at the strength of schedule of the teams, interestingly, you know, Notre Dame has defeated 4 teams that were in the top 25 at the time they played. USC still to come, presuming that they can win out until they see Notre Dame, you know, would be in the top 25 again. Kansas State, Big 12, you know, who knows where that conference really is this year. We've seen a lot of high-scoring games like you've seen. Oregon has the toughest part of their schedule remaining, but is Notre Dame's schedule good enough, you know, to get it over the appearance of this team just can't score enough points to be deserving to be in the number 2 spot?
Well, I mean, right off the bat, I mean, you can compare Notre Dame and Kansas State via their common opponent, Oklahoma. I mean, Notre Dame pounded Oklahoma down there in Norman at night in a game that the entire country was focused on, 30-13, the final there. Kansas State also defeated Oklahoma, but just barely escaped, I think, with a 4 or 5 point win, and needed some very fortunate plays to win it, plays where Kansas State fumbled on the goal line. And so, you know, I think there's some comparisons to be made there. Oregon has yet to play Stanford and beat USC by, I think, 10 or 11. So we'll have some common opponents there to judge the teams by. But thus far, I mean, the computers don't lie. They're not influenced by bias or prejudice, and they indicate that Notre Dame has the strongest schedule and rate Notre Dame very, very highly, just on the tail of Alabama at this point.
An interesting thing to see will be this week. You know, Alabama, Oregon, Kansas State, all coming off of big wins at night. Now, maybe potential hangover games for them this week. You know, last week Notre Dame was coming off the big win against Oklahoma and had to survive at home against Pittsburgh in triple overtime, but that was kind of coming off of their big game. Now these other teams have to come off of their big games last week, and, you know, Alabama's got a good Texas A&M team that they have to deal with, a highly ranked team. Oregon has to see Cal, although Cal, you know, isn't having a very good season. Could that be a trap game for them with the games that Oregon still has to come with Stanford and Oregon State? And then you've got Kansas State, who's got a banged-up quarterback in Colin Klein, facing a TCU team that, although it's suffered a little bit this year, lost its quarterback because he's had some issues off the field. TCU has been in big games the last several years. I mean, Gary Patterson has that squad doing good things. He's built the program up. They certainly at any time, I think, have the potential to knock off a top team. So it'll be interesting to see whether any of those teams have a hangover game this week where they have to survive and whether or not they do.
Absolutely. I mean, it's hard. You work with young kids, high school kids, even at the college level. It is difficult to have college students up to play their very best game week in and week out. We saw it when Notre Dame became a little bit lackadaisical, perhaps against Pitt, had some mistakes and penalties, led to a much closer game than anybody wanted to see there. But, you know, the thing that interests me is how exciting it is, just our college football system that allows a very small, insignificant, almost community college level institution in Boston to get a game against Notre Dame. I mean, they must really be excited that they get the chance to have Notre Dame come in there. I'm going to head to Boston and make sure things turn out the right way. So it's certainly something to look forward to.
Well, after that game against Boston College, games with Wake Forest and the big one with USC and the finale out at the Coliseum in Los Angeles for Notre Dame. So I'll say the Irish still getting the title game. Right now, Vegas has Notre Dame at a 10-1 odds to win the national title. I like their chances to get into that game. We'll see what happens, but certainly it's going to be exciting down the stretch here of the college football season. Chris, thanks for being here again. Thanks to all of you for joining us for another edition of the Bordas and Bordas Legal Review. Glad we were able to break down the election results and also get in a little bit of football here. President Barack Obama, is President of the United States of America for another 4 years, and this edition of the Bordas and Bordas Legal Review is signed, sealed, and delivered. We'll see you next week.